So let's begin by giving you all a few moments to do your thing, and then we'll talk about it. Okay. I'm assuming no one.
Some extension.
Okay, so the kind of thought-provoking thing that I got in the email about this was talking about science fiction and how science fiction has either influenced or affected the work that I've done. And so for me, the introduction here, I was one of the co-founders of Makerbot, and I was the guy that said, hey, you guys want to help me? I'm building 3D printers here, and I think we should find a way to make these like widespread and really popular and stuff. And so a ton of that was influenced by science fiction. I grew up reading books and watching Star Trek and being like, oh my god, that stuff is so cool, I want to be in space. And so there's 3 books I want to throw out here, and if you're into this kind of stuff, like these were kind of like world-changing books for me. The first one was by Werner Wensch, and it's called A Fire Upon the Deep. This one, it's kind of automation as a prerequisite to a functioning high culture. And the universe in his book is built around that, with like zones of thought where different sorts of computation are possible, from like the unthinking depths where the universe doesn't even support like sentient life, all the way up to like the really high realms where anything with a big amount of computation will just like transcend. Kind of Ian Banks, who wrote the Culture series, tons of work out there, and it's just really good. Fiction about like a post-scarcity society run by benevolent AIs, and it's all about like, okay, so what do you do when like you can't die and everything you want to do is possible? And then last but not least, Neil Stephenson's Diamond Age, just huge important book about digital fabrication, automation, and it talks a lot about the repercussions on society dealing with that. As well as things like centralization versus decentralization, and like kind of the whole open versus closed debate. So those are like my big 3 of like really good books that deal with automation and robots and like kind of manufacturing and this idea of post-scarcity, which is, I think we're moving towards.
Thank you so much for your inspiring provocations. I just wanted to start with a really big question, which I think relates to all of our projects in the room, which is the extent to which you can actively design the future. Is that something that you think is possible?
So I've read a lot of science fiction, and a lot of the topics that it deals on. One of the things I think is really interesting, read a bunch of stuff on, is the whole taking the concept of like quantum multiple universes, which is kind of a dry academic sort of like topic, and turning it into something fun and accessible and like what, really cool. And so one of the things that I've taken away a lot is like, in these books you definitely can kind of direct the course, and I like to think of it as like a train on the tracks, and you can either switch the universe that you're in into like a more awesome course or a less awesome course. And I mean, science has shown that, with quantum theory and things like that, that it's likely that a whole multitude of all these different universes and experiences is possible. And I think it is possible for us to shift and direct which one we're going into.
Okay, I'm going to try to throw something else out, which is the question about fear and desire. I think a lot of the science fiction books that have been mentioned, and stories that, and also a lot of the stuff that is happening around us today, I mean also in the Maker Carnival, and has an element of fear, an element of terror that maybe is sort of just bubbling there under the surface. I mean, of course, there's nothing that seems so terrifying when you walk outside and everyone's being friendly, but it's not that hard to sort of speculate out and say where this is leading, especially for someone who is immersed in the world of science fiction, is a story that is quite terrifying. And at the same time, there seems to be an unconscious, or maybe sometimes conscious, desire for that same future, that same, and a lot of that has to do with the transformation of the species, the loss of human agency, and these sort of things. So if I can, I know this is not quite a question, but if I can ask you to just speak when you think about your own work and how the future plays, if you can think about this mixture of terror and fear and also seduction and desire.
So I read usually when I read science fiction, I like the, kind of light and fluffy and like, hey, here's this wonderful future and like, here's what people are doing in it. But I read a book recently, and I think we were talking about this earlier, called Nexus by a new author, Ramez something, I can't remember the guy's name, but it's like a near future book where someone basically invents a drug called Nexus that you take it and it's like nanomachinery and attaches onto individual neurons in your brain. And it's basically this whole idea of being able to control, like read and write to your brain on a fundamental level. And so it goes into this whole ramification of, if you could do that. And so basically these nerds build like Linux on top of this, right? So you have like this computer stack. And so, and then like the US government like bans this stuff, right? Because you can use it for all sorts of good and bad things. So like bad things, like they call it like coercive drugs, right? So if someone hacks into your brain and, they have this scene in there where this like guy is going around at parties and like hacking into people and like has them like controls their body, comes over and like transfers their money from their bank account to his, and then so there's all this awful stuff. And the big part of the book is kind of this fight between the people that want this, because you could also become like sort of post-human, and there's a lot of stuff about like group consciousness, and if you have this like networked direct brain-to-brain communication, you can enable all of these amazing things, but at the cost of there's also this really awful stuff. Like one of them, another situation, like someone hacks a Secret Service agent and attempts to assassinate the president, and so there's like this whole swath of things, and it's one of the few books I've read in a long time where I was like, that's really scary. I thought having computers in my brain would be really cool, but I'm kind of freaked out now.
It seems to me like your project itself, as far as very limited understanding of it, this project to automate everything, to make machines that make other machines. If you could just for a second talk about that in terms of like, I assume that is something that obviously has this mixture of terror and fear and also desire in it.
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things that really drives me and is a common theme through the 3 books that I was talking about earlier is this whole idea of automation and computerization of physical processes. So we all have seen what happens when you kind of figure out how to digitize information, and all of the things that used to be physical before, so like music and books and knowledge and transferring the stuff is now digital, and we have the internet and it's networked, and it costs $0 to send this stuff across the world, crunch data, and do all of these things with information. And so, I look at the real world and see, okay, we used to handcraft chairs, we used to handcraft all of this stuff, and now technology is advancing and we're applying the same automation, the same computerized methodology to the creation of real physical world things. And so, but we're not there yet, because there's still a lot of things that are made manually. So you have automated process to produce parts on a 3D printer, but someone has to put them together. And so, it's kind of this semi-automated area. And so, but what happens when we kind of extrapolate that out to a point in time where you have this sort of quote-unquote Star Trek replicator, where you have a box where you say, I want this, and you get it. And the kind of the desire and the want there is, hey, we can have these machines that provide all of this stuff that was extremely complicated or resource intensive to produce before, in the same way that, say 200 years ago, if you wanted to listen to music, you had to get a band, you had to get someone to sing, you had to have a guy playing a piano in the bar, so you had music. Now, you know, you pull out the phone and there's just music everywhere. So in this post-scarcity society where, you know, energy is cheap. We have a giant fusion bomb blasting us with more energy than we use in a year every day. The planet is made of all sorts of awesome materials that, you know, the hard part is taking the energy and taking the materials and turning them into things that we want to use. And that's where a lot of our inefficiencies and scarcity comes from, is that it's hard and people need to do the work there. And so I think, you know, the desire there is like, wow, we could, you know, eliminate poverty, we could eliminate all these awful things that result from not having the things that you need to survive. But on the flip side, like, if anybody can make anything, you know, what happens when someone like does figure out how to build self-replicating robots and doesn't put in some sort of limiter there and they like eat the world? And you know, there's a lot of people that have written about the whole like gray goo concept with like self-replicating nanomachines and that sort of stuff. So you know, I think we're smart enough to be able to fight off some sort of robot invasion. But you know, that's another like common theme in science fiction, is this fear of something surpassing or you know, supplanting the human race. And I think that's going to happen eventually. I don't, you know, but I think even then something like that would be more than human. It's not like, I really don't think anything that could be brainless could overcome humans. It would have to be something beyond humans to overcome the human race. So I'm not too worried about that.